Hello, everyone.
Hey, JD.
Hey Chief, how are you?
I am well, thanks. How about yourself?
Good. I think we're waiting on one other panelist. Meredith, it's nice to meet you. I'm Dominique. I'll be sort of moderating tonight for CPE, so thanks so much for taking time. I know it's like 5:30 your time, right?
Yeah, no problem. Happy to be here.
So you're all Jody, do we know it if Life will be joining us?
She should be.
Okay.
21 people.
All right, Life, do you want to go ahead and turn on your camera? I think if you're ready, we'll get started in a few.
Yes, sorry, give me 1 second. I'm trying to turn it on right now.
All right, no worries. Can you guys hear my fan in the background? It's probably annoying, isn't it? No, you can't hear it? All right, perfect. It's hot in this office. Hello. Nice to meet you. All right, so Ashley, are we all ready to get started now, or do we want to wait a few more minutes?
I think we're good to go.
Okay, so I guess before we bring everyone in, Life, Meredith, Chief, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm Dominique, and I work at CPE as a senior advisor of community and external engagement here. That's just a fancy way of saying that I do everything that I can to help people do what they are hoping to do when it comes to talking about these important issues. And my team is really committed to young people and lifting up the voices of young people. So really excited to have you here. And if there are any questions that you want to lift up, you just flag it for me and I'll bring that to the table. Same thing with you, Chief. We're going to focus on the run of show that you have been prepped on, but we do want to keep it flexible in case folks have real questions that they are dying to sort of ask. And let's keep it, respectful, and anything that we can do to make this a really great event, I'm happy to do that. All right. So with that said, I guess, Ashley, we're ready to go if you want to launch everything.
Everything should be ready to go for you guys.
Okay, we're live.
Yes.
All right, perfect. So, hey, everybody, I'm Dominique. My name is Dominique Johnson, and I am Senior Advisor of Community and External Engagement for the Center for Policing Equity. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight at this youth town hall here. I want to say that the objective of this event and the goal is that we're meeting to provide community members the opportunity to learn about CPE's report on SDPD stop search and use of force data. And so we're going to have some time to present some of those findings and clarify any questions that folks have about the report. And then we're going to give you all a chance to ask questions and pose any comments that you may have to CPE, the department, and the city at large. We want to have this meeting be an opportunity to connect over shared values and goals and encourage participants to drop their name and their organizations in the chat. And then we'll have, of course, a Q&A session. where we can use that to have you all submit questions if you feel comfortable or inclined. And I understand that there's probably tonight going to be a little bit of dissatisfaction that community members cannot directly ask questions or that they may be competing events, but this will be live streamed so that you can share your concerns and comments on all of the mechanisms available to you that have been listed throughout this entire engagement process. The city council meeting on the 29th provided opportunities to let the officials know how you felt about everything so far when it came to the report. And then this town hall is going to provide another opportunity for you all to engage. And we want to be able to digestibly get this content out to you and clarify any questions with the chief and our young panelists tonight. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guests tonight. We have Chief David Nislet, we have Life California, we have Meredith Wiggins, and we have our CPE staff, Jamie Schutz and Michael Burbank here tonight. And the run of show is going to go like this. So we want to have 60 minutes for you all, but we have 90 minutes if folks are burning to have this discussion. So I'm excited to move forward with this. Again, want to lift up and acknowledge that the work is already being done here by the community in San Diego, and we value your partnership in this work to make policing more equitable. And we want to emphasize that this report and the conversation are meant to bolster those efforts. And we recognize sort of the frustration and the tension points that folks are facing when it comes to talking about policing and public safety. And so we're asking that everybody approach the conversation with the best intentions and hold space for respectful dialogue. And tonight, we're going to go over the findings of our program and the report. We're going to ask some questions, and then we're going to go into a Q&A, and then we'll move forward. So with that right now, I want to turn over the floor to Michael Burbank and Janie, and then the chief to deliver any opening remarks that you have.
All right. Do we want to start with our PowerPoint to give the results?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you have that? You're ready for the link?
We are ready to go. So let's go to some screen sharing right here. 1 minute. Is that showing up appropriately for everyone? Dominique, are you seeing this? Okay, very, very good. To all those listening, first of all, thank you for coming. The Center for Policing Equity, on behalf of Dr. Philip Ativa Goff and Dr. Tracy Kaziz, our co-founders, we are happy to be here. And Michael and I will, Michael's the Director of Law Enforcement Initiatives. I'm the Relationship Manager with San Diego PD and CPE, working to bridge information communication. And we're just, again, very happy to be here and be a part of what you need to hear. So we want you to understand, first of all, that our work is powered by science. It produces analysis that are identifying and reducing causes of racial disparities in public safety and advocates for large scale and meaningful change. We use data to build a more fair and just system, and we partner with law enforcement and communities. The aim is to bridge the divide of communication and intergenerational mistrust and pain. We've done this as a collaborative effort when San Diego Police Department reached out to us in August of 2019. So they took it upon themselves to reach out, and they joined us in partnering in what's called the National Justice Database. And that's the nation's first database tracking national statistics on police behavior. And so we gathered data with their help from 2017 to 2020 as part of this National Justice Database project. CPE analyzed the data provided by San Diego PD, and we looked at 3 different areas. We looked at non-traffic stops, something that you might consider pedestrian stops. We looked at traffic stops, and we looked at use and force. And we did this for 3 reasons. We wanted to examine whether some racial groups in San Diego experience more frequent or burdensome police contact, more so than other groups. We wanted to help identify any racial disparities in police interactions with the community. and to provide further opportunities for investigation that San Diego Police Department can use to address any of those identified disparities. In doing so, we wanted to make sure that you had an idea, you live in a grand city, and we wanted to give you some idea of the demographics. So San Diego Police Department serves a community of 1.4 million people and is approximately 350 square miles. This is a very large city. It employs over 1,950 police officers, and their commitment is to fair and equitable policing. The results of this study will show that there are racial disparities shown from the data that we collected in the interactions in all three areas: non-traffic stops, traffic stops, and the use of force. To read the full report, you have the opportunity to go to the city website, the PD, under the PD, and look it up, sandiego.gov/CPE report. And this is the first opportunity that you will have in seeing a digital format of this report and its findings. And I think you'll enjoy it in that format. I'm going to turn it over now to Michael Burbank to just give you a brief introduction as to what to expect when you open up the report in this new digital format. Michael?
Thank you, Janie. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about real briefly kind of how to navigate the report, how the report should be looked at, digested, and understood. But before I do that, the first thing I think that's always important to let people know is that the Center for Policing Equity is a nonprofit organization. The National Justice Database Program offers these services and this analysis to police departments at no charge. They're under no obligation to provide this information to us. They're doing that of their own free will. And we just do our analysis based on the data provided. We're not owing anything to the police department. They don't pay any salaries here at CPE. And we're a neutral voice, and the findings are what the findings are at the end of the day. So now I just want to kind of dive into navigating the report. And there's a couple of things you need to understand when looking at the National Justice Database report. And one of those is that it's really one part of a whole, right? We have actually two sections you need to be aware of, and they really need to be consumed together. So the first is the digital report itself, and we look at that as a diagnosis of the problem. And the second part is the NJD companion site, and you'll see that there is a link to that right there on the landing page of the report, the digital report. So we look at the companion site as actually being that treatment plan, if you will. If the report is a diagnosis of the problem, the companion site is a treatment plan and gives insights into ways you can look at the data and use the data to make positive changes that will impact disparity numbers over time. So what you're seeing right now is the landing page, and it gives you a high-level summary of the findings of the report. Go ahead and go to the next slide for me. If you tab onto the next section, that's the context section. Janie kind of went through demographics already, and I'll go through the findings of the other areas right after I walk you through kind of using the report. But you can see it next to the context, there's tabs for non-traffic stops, traffic stops, use of force, and data notes. And on the context page here, as you look, this gives you those demographics that Janie talked about. If you were to page down on this page, go ahead and go to the next slide. It has a section where it describes San Diego Police Department's key initiatives related to equity. You can see what the department is currently doing, and there are some other things that they're putting into play after the report based on the results of the report as well. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is the non-traffic stop slide, and all of the sections, the traffic stops and use of force, are all built this same exact way. The very first thing on the page will be the key findings. And then as you page down through the report, you'll see how the analysis is graphically represented there in different areas. Each of those graphic representations. If you hover over anything like the bars on the bar graph, it'll give you counts and things of that nature to give you a little more clarifying what you're seeing in the graph. Also on each of those, under each graphic representation, there are two things there. What is this showing and how is this generated? You can click on those and it'll give you a brief description of what the graph is actually detailing. And then the second part is like what went into generating the information that shows you what the analysis results were. So all the pages are set up to be that way. Next, we're going to move into that, the secondary part, the treatment plan, so to speak, as I mentioned earlier in our companion website. And the landing page there just says, how do you use your digital report? It has tabs at the bottom of the page that you can walk through to direct you to various content. So next slide, please. There's a section about your digital report. It kind of tells you the specifics of how it was generated. It also talks about CPE's methodologies, what went into this report, what type of analysis we use, what type we don't use, and why we don't use those. Go ahead to the next part. Then it has the next section that talks about taking action after you receive your digital report. It walks you through steps you can take to measure and monitor the findings of the report, measure and monitor things going forward that actually are fueled by the community and the values that the community wants the police department and the community to uphold and that sort of thing. Next is a section you can go through that has the pathway from data to action. And this is CPE's guide to policy recommendations. This takes a further dive, deeper dive into looking at all of the findings of the report, how you can, departments and communities can use this report to really come up with strategies that will impact the disparities that are noted in the report. It talks about all sorts of resources and methods to use to kind of address those things. Next, I want to dive actually into what the findings of the reports were on the three areas we talked about, the non-traffic, traffic, and use of force. So in the non-traffic stops, some of the key findings of all the people who experienced non-traffic stops in the reported period, Black people made up 22.6%, Latinx people made up 25.8%, and white people made up 46.1%. After accounting for crime rates, poverty rates, and neighborhood demographics, Black people experienced non-traffic stops 4.2 times as often as white people. On the traffic stop section, key findings of all the people who experienced traffic stops in the reported period, Black people made up 14.8%, Latinx people made up 33.5%, white people made up 37.5%. Additionally, one stop, Black people were searched 2.5 times as often as white people, and Latinx people were searched 2.2 times as often as white people. And in the use of force, the key findings of all people who experienced use of force in the reported period, Black people made up 26.3%, Latinx people made up 31.1%, white people made up 37.5%. And after we accounted for crime, poverty, and racial demographics, Black people were subjected to force 4.8 times as often per resident as were white people. And the three most common types of force recorded were holds, firearm pointed, and takedowns.
So one of the things that, after looking at key findings, is really trying to answer, what does this mean? And we felt it's very important, we actually use that word vital, to note that disparities are always going to be a reason for concern, a cause for concern. The findings in this research show that racial groups in San Diego experience policing differently. And while the causes of disparity are complex and cannot be clearly explained, ultimately, the San Diego Police Department is responsible for addressing these disparate policing. There are certain factors that are outside the control of the department, like poverty and crime rate. They also contribute to disparities. Measuring these factors can help infer what portion of the disparity is likely caused by police behavior and/or department policy and practices.
So the question is, where do we go from here? Really what CPE does not want this to be is just another report. There have been several reports done for the city of San Diego and the San Diego Police Department that have enumerated disparities. And, you know, the concern is just basically report fatigue, right? We have a community receiving another report that tells them what they already know or what they've personally experienced, right? And so what we really want to do is actually take this report and move it to action. And that's what that companion website enables us to do, is actually talk about opportunities for further investigation with the findings of the report. And we have had some of those discussions already with the police department, and they have been looking at a deeper dive into a number of areas where we found disparities. But really what needs to be involved in this is actually, understanding what the community wants from the police department and how that can impact disparate treatment as well, and making sure that the police department is living up to the values of the community. And so as part of this, we really want to hear the community's voice. We've had a community forum. We have a number of people with the Center for Policing Equity's community engagement arm that have been interacting with members of the community and various groups within the community to really get some feedback there. We've done a community forum. We have the Youth Town Hall tonight, and we're also looking forward to some roundtable discussions with other groups in San Diego to make sure that we're doing anything we can to help lift those voices and make sure the lines of communication between the community and the police department and the city at large are being heard. Thank you.
And in doing so, again, as Michael said, thank you all for listening. Thank you for appreciating and taking the time to come here. And we're going to turn this back over to Dominique to continue on.
All right, well, I'm coming right out of the gate with a question for you, Michael. I know that this is a council public comment that came up around the report itself. Why did the report only look at questions related to racial disparities when other disparities, so thinking, for example, LGBTQIA+ and people with disabilities, have also been shown to exist?
Yeah, so great question, Dom. So the Center for Policing Equity is always concerned about any inequities, but really we are focused on race, and that was kind of the crux of this report and the National Justice Database Program. One of the philosophies or principles when we're looking at this National Justice Database, as part of this, not only are we providing San Diego with a report, they provided us with data, and that data goes to fill our National Justice Database, and that gives our researchers the opportunity to actually investigate police behavior and that sort of thing. And one of the principles that we kind of follow is that we want that standardized as much as possible. So we're looking for data points that most departments gather across the country. Something like an LGBTQ or something like that are things we can do on kind of a more nuanced individual level if we can find the time to do that. The department did include some of that information around disparities in LGBTQ data points with us, but that was kind of outside the scope of what we were doing. We hope to use those kind of things in the future potentially. The other thing I would say in that regard is the department is aware of some of those disparities, and the treatment plan we have in that companion website of what to do when you find those disparities, those can all be used to actually kind of treat that problem, so to speak, or any disparate findings that the police department is aware of from their RIPA data as well. So there are opportunities, even though the report itself didn't focus on that, to actually utilize the information contained in that companion website to address some of those things as well.
I can come off and mute. I could thank you for giving us that information. But thank you so much to Janie and Michael. I know I was told that you all will then turn off your cameras and fade into the background unless new questions would come in so that we could give the space to Meredith, Life, and Chief Neslet. So thank you again. So I actually do want to turn it over to you, both Meredith and Life. First, I didn't actually know that we were recording. I thought we were in a practice before Boom came on. So I would love to actually have you introduce yourselves to everyone. And again, thank you for your time for being here. And then Chief, you can introduce yourself and we're gonna go into some questions that I have for you, all three of you, and then we'll go into Q&A because I saw Richard and Francis, I think, Francine had some questions. So who wants to kick it off first?
I can go first.
Sounds
My name is Meredith Wiggins. I'm from San Diego, graduate of University of San Diego. And I guess that's my information. Yeah.
Oh, what'd you study? You graduated. Study.
I was a history major with an ethnic studies minor. So I just graduated in May.
Oh my goodness, congratulations. COVID graduation, I'm sure, but congratulations nonetheless.
Thank you.
And hello, my name is Life California. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am an rising senior now at High Tech High Chula Vista. I'm a community organizer and activist with the main goal of Black liberation. So that's kind of what I'm coming into this space with the mindset of, and trying to dive into these findings with that, same end goal. And shout out ethnic studies, Meredith. I also teach ethnic studies at a student-led ethnic studies class at my school. So we love it.
All right. Y'all are awesome. This is great. So now, Chief, do you want to do an introduction for yourself as well? And then we can jump right in.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Thank you, Meredith and Dominique and Life and Mike and Jenny. And also thank you to Center for Police Equity. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Obviously, our young people are very important, not only to me, but to the community. So I look forward to that. I'm also a native San Diegan, born and raised here, been on this police department for 33 years, and the chief a little over 3 years.
All right, well, you've got some big boots to fill here with these questions that are coming in. I just want to let you know. So the first question that I have, Chief, is that I understand that the police department has made a number of changes recently. So can you speak more about those changes and sort of the path forward to addressing the disparities that were evidenced in the report? And I want you to think about and explain where community will fit in and how do young people fit into that process as well?
No, absolutely. So, a little over a year ago, we made quite a few changes. Obviously, we removed the karate restraint from our use of force matrix, if you will. We changed use of force policy, making certain that we were aligned with both the bills 230 and 392. We had a duty to intervene standalone policy, a de-escalation standalone policy. We added a new policy on, interacting with our non-binary and LGBTQ communities. We're currently in the process of changing our consent search policy and many others. And so the question is, how does the community and especially youth get involved in that? So when we look at our policies, for example, we also had a brand new policy as it pertains to how we interact or how we respond to First Amendment type activities, so protests, if you will. We allow community involvement, we allow community input. In fact, after we released the policy on First Amendment, we got several letters that asked for some things to be added, and we have looked at that and we will be adding that. So again, a lot of that has to do with community input. I'm very big at listening to the community and allowing when is possible to include that into not only our policies and procedures, but also strategic operation decisions and looking into that.
Got it. Thank you so much. So I do want to be able to have Meredith and Life. Do you have anything that you want to ask directly to what the chief has said? Any questions at that point? And if you don't, that's okay, because I have questions for you both as panelists. So I'll just open the floor. If you do have a direct comment or question to that, feel free. All right, well,
I'm good for the questions.
you're good?
Yeah,
right.
I'm good. I'm good.
Okay, cool. So then we're gonna go to the actual question that I have for you. And then remember, you guys, we're gonna open it up to Q&A. So everybody who is putting your questions in the chat, I'm seeing them and I'm queuing them up so that we can start asking those as well. So this question is for you, Life and Meredith. How do you see young people being involved in making these positive changes in local public safety systems? And how do you foresee more opportunities being afforded to you all to do this? I know you all get that question a lot, probably. How can young people help? What can young people do? Tell us, like all the time. So first of all, I acknowledge that that probably is a question that you get asked all the time. And I'd like you to scream from the rooftops the same answer that you probably give, with a little bit more emphasis on what you would foresee happening in the future, as in like tomorrow.
I could share a little bit on this. So also one more thing before in my introduction, I missed out on a great opportunity to do a quick little land acknowledgement, recognizing that we're speaking on public safety and big topics that affect the native Kumeyaay land of which we stand on. So forever honoring our Kumeyaay brothers and sisters who we are currently occupying. With that, going on to the question, I think that the discussion of how youth can get involved is more of how can we activate the power that the youth already have, right? I think that right now, so many people, specifically youth and any kind of marginalized identity, we do not have the tools to activate that kind of power. So I think that that the best thing to do is recognize, you know, the space and community you're in and where you can create those tools to activate that power, right? So I think that as far as what you can do when you wake up tomorrow, I think getting organized is the best thing to do, finding which organizations align with your goals and your beliefs and rolling with that, honestly. For me, I've always kind of been politically active, even with my beliefs kind of, you know, moving around. I always had the same goal of being within politics. And so I think that goes for everyone, as far as no matter what interest you have, what political belief you do have, there's always an opportunity to get involved. And I think that there are plenty of ways to tap into that and start exercising your power literally tomorrow.
I like it. What about you, Meredith?
Yeah, I really like Life's point, and also I really appreciate the like land acknowledgement. I think that's super crucial. I also forgot to mention that I was president of USC's Black Student Union this past year, so that's something I'm really proud of. And we've dealt with public safety on campuses, and I've had like issues with public safety, and I have a lot of Black students at USD have. So right now, like they're forming like an advisory committee to try to address some of the issues that are happening. And I can only speak from like a college campus aspect and like a college student. Really what Life said, like a lot of us don't have like the time or the resources to like make a lot of changes. Like I was a full-time student. I was like working part-time. Like I was really, really busy, but I still found time to like do things that I cared about and like activist work. And like I was BSU president for the whole year, being online and dealing with like anti-Blackness on every single corner. It was very difficult and it's very exhausting. But one thing I would tell like the young people is like protect like your energy, I guess, and like pick your battles, because I've learned that over the years. Like there's some things that like it's just not worth my like energy and time to like get super frustrated about, and I have to like pass it along to somebody else who like has the resources and has the power to like make a lot of change. But that doesn't mean like don't do anything. That doesn't mean like sit idly by. It means like pick and choose like what you're really passionate about and go from there. Like I'm really passionate about like history and like ethnic studies, and like over like my time of college, I've really like tried to like implement that and like making like it a requirement at my school. And like what Life is talking about, like it's super crucial at the high school level. So it is definitely important for like youth, like anyone who's like young, to like find your voice and find your little like niche, and then just like go like full throttle, but don't try to like handle every single problem in the world, because you're just gonna get burnt out. And that's like at the end of the day, that's not your job. So that's something I would definitely say.
Thank you for that, both of you guys. I have a question as you all were both talking. What made you come here tonight? what was the impetus for you deciding to be a panelist for this particular event, knowing that this report was coming out, and working with the department to do that?
So I think it's a really interesting question because I heard about the report. It was kind of, you were unable to avoid it, at least in the spaces I was in, because it was something that was reassuring what a lot of us already knew, right? And so I think that when I heard the opportunity to join this panel, initially I didn't know too much about what we were going, the specifics of it, and I was just interested in talking about, policing and public safety and from a youth perspective. And after meeting with different representatives for this specific forum, and we spoke about how we would be working with the police department, the police chief himself here. I actually had said I wasn't going to be able to join today because, and I think that we can get into this more later as well, but I think that goes to show that like this is data and these numbers that we are looking over and different graphics, but the real reality of it is that someone as a 16-year-old Black girl doesn't feel safe using, or doesn't have that same trust or relationship to have to feel safe in like an environment like this. I spoke to a few mentors and I ended up changing my mind. I'm really glad that I am able to share some thoughts today, but I just think that it was really kind of an interesting pausing moment for me, because as much as I want to make sure that I'm representing, my own beliefs and what, the people that I'm trying to protect, serve, and love, it's also the same battle of understanding for, which conversations I do want to be a part of and don't, and which ones are going to move us forward and otherwise. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Meredith, you want to add anything?
Yeah, for me, you're all like reached out to me. We've been in contact since like end of May, I think. And like I graduated, so like I'm moving out of San Diego, but like the San Diego community is still something it's still like my family's from here, and like it's something super important to me. So when he asked me to be a part of the program, I was like, yeah, sure. Like, I'm used to like, speaking about this kind of issues and stuff like that. So I just want to be like as involved in like local politics as I can now to have a lot more free time. When I was like in school, it was really hard. So I definitely like commend like life for like doing all this at like such a young age, because I don't think I would be able to. But yeah, I just want to like learn more and share my experiences. So I was like very excited to come to this tonight.
Well, first of all, both of you guys are doing amazing things and are way above what I was doing in high school and college, I can tell you that. But it made me think about, as you all were speaking about why you showed up and why you wanted to learn more tonight, and sort of the impetus of what do you do as a woman of color, as a young Black woman, when it comes to policing within San Diego. And Chief, for me, a couple of comments that have come up in the chat have been around questions of, as a woman of color, as folks who pay taxes and follow the law to a T, how do I ensure that unnecessary force or illegal search and seizures won't happen to me as a member of this community? That has come up in a couple of comments lifting up from, I won't say names because I just want to be protective of that, but those are a couple folks who were in there talking a lot about specific procedural issues that have occurred within the San Diego Police Department's policies and procedures, and just thinking about how it impacts their communities and how it impacts them personally as folks of color. What do you say to folks? What do you say to folks as they bring those issues up, in particular when it comes to this new report and the work that you all are currently undertaking within the department itself?
No, thank you for that question. It really starts with communication, and it really starts with having those conversations. So again, I really want to say thank you to all of you, to Meredith and Life for coming on, and two very accomplished young ladies. So I appreciate the conversation. Going back to your question, it really goes to having open communication. And one thing I really want to push out there is, if somebody does feel like they were mistreated by a San Diego police officer or any law enforcement officer for that matter, obviously there's people you can call. We have a very robust internal affairs unit that you can call different people throughout the city, call the police department, you can call the city, you can go to any of the police stations and file a complaint, or you can flag down a police officer, or you can call our dispatch, because it is something that we want to see. And my promise to you is that we will do a very thorough investigation on that, because the last thing is we are public servants. And so our whole job is to provide public service. And my goal as the chief is to provide the very best public service that we can, making certain that we are treating everybody, irregardless of where you live or the color of your skin or your sexual orientation, any of that, that we are providing the same service to everybody that we come across, irregardless of where in the city, time of day, day of the week, or anything like that. So that's my promise to everybody is we're here to listen. We're here to make improvements. I think we've done a lot of improvements kind of to what we started earlier on, some of the things that we've been talking about. But it really goes to just really wanting to provide the very best public service. And doing that is part of that is having conversation and learning where we can make improvements.
Gotcha. So I'm going to push you a little bit on there because I do have a specific question around when you're talking about providing that service and the implementation of that service and solutions. So a question that came in, and I think it was from Richard, but if it was not Richard, I do have your question. If the implementation of solutions for concerning issues are based on data, how are the data deficiencies being accounted for? That's something that has come up a lot when thinking about the data component of this, the report piece of it. How are you accounting for that?
Well, one of the suggestions, one of the recommendations from Center for Policing Equity was when we look at this data to really do a deep dive and look at this as data points of how we can make improvements, where we could possibly make changes to policy procedure, to strategic operations. But we really have to look at it. It's a very complex issue. As both Janie and Mike have said, this is a very complex issue. And so we need to really break it down and look at it, whether it falls under the context of something that the San Diego Police Department or law enforcement control, or something outside of such as homelessness, addiction, mental health, crime, poverty. There's a whole bunch of different things. So really looking at that and then giving it context and breaking it down. And that's one of the things that we did. We took a very deep dive into some of this and looking at trying to break it down into where we're seeing our most contacts. Our top 10 beats in the city of San Diego, where we're seeing our most contacts, where we're seeing our use of force, where we're seeing mental illness being impacted and causing that intersection, and also addiction. And so we know there's disparities in a lot of those communities. And so trying to drive information out of that could help drive policy, could help operational decisions by me, by our command staff, to try to drive down those disparities. That's really what I look at with this data. And that's why I thank CPE for pushing out this data. So it allows us to really take a deeper look into it and decide what it is that we can do, what it is that we don't have control over, such as those 4 characteristics I mentioned. And seeing even in that area, if there's something that we can do to help to change that a little bit, to change those causes. But again, the whole goal is to help drive down disparities, provide the best kind of policies and procedures we can, constantly looking at best practices. As we've mentioned, we've changed a lot of our policies and we'll continue to look at those.
No, that makes sense. And what I'm thinking about as well is beyond, sort of those policies and practices, the conversation comes around investment in communities and thinking about how policies and practices are a component of an investment to a larger ecosystem of wellness of Black, Brown, and other vulnerable and marginalized communities. And so a question that I wanted to lift up for all 3 of you, so I'll start with you, Meredith, then I'll go to Life, and then Chief, I'll have you close out. How should the city commit to reinvesting in Black, Brown, and other marginalized communities? What do you think those priorities should be? So Meredith, you were first. It was tagged in that order. So I want to, whoever lifted that question up, they tagged you first. So do you want me to repeat it? Or are you good?
Yeah, can you repeat the question? I was
Yeah.
just thinking it.
Okay, so it was a 2-parter. So how should the city commit to reinvesting in Black, Brown, and other marginalized communities? And what do you think the priorities should be?
I think this should be a huge priority, number one. I think one way to do this is, oh God, there's so many layers to this question. I'm like trying to think of
There's no wrong answer.
There's no wrong answer, I know, but there's so many layers. I think investing in like getting businesses off the ground and not like liquor stores, like actual, like, not that they're bad, but like the fact that there's like, if you go to Southeast San Diego and there's like 10 liquor stores on one block, and then you go to like North County where I live and there's like none, and there's like one Food for Less in South San Diego, and there's like 10 Vons within like a 2-mile radius, like that's a discrepancy. So it's not like getting jobs in areas, not just like liquor store jobs, education, like building up the school system. A lot of like schools who have Black and brown, like primarily like students, have like really high dropout rates, and that's not a coincidence at all. Like that's part of the system. Like the system was built to do that. If you go to like Torrey Pines, like it's gonna be way different than if you go to like Lincoln or you go to Morris or something like that. Those are just some big things I could think of, like businesses, education, and also building like a healthy relationship with police in the community. Not just like a relationship, it has to be a healthy relationship, and it has to, like, the people in the community must feel like they can rely on the police officers, and the police are going to come and like do good and not cause even more chaos, because that's what some Black and brown people feel like when they call the police. It just causes more problems and more animosities, and there's been incidences where that's happened. So there needs to be like actual like safety, like a safe feeling around police officers, and that has to start with like a healthy relationship and like going to the communities and getting to know the people and not just passing judgments upon them because they look a certain way or they live in a certain area and stuff like that.
So I'm going to push you a little bit there too. When you're talking about healthy relationships, and as someone else mentioned in the chat as well, building that community policing relationship, what does that look like to you? And I'm going to come back to the actual question for the other folks, but what does that relationship look like to you, Meredith, as someone who is a Native resident involved in the community and active?
To me, right now, like I've lived in San Diego my entire life. The police.
I think she's
them, but like they don't really mean it. Oh, sorry, like my Wi-Fi just cut out. The police, like what I've experienced, I've always felt like this anxiousness and this I always feel nervous around police officers, even though I've never been in trouble with the law. Like I'm like a law abiding citizen, but like I just feel anxious, and I think a lot of like Black and brown people do because of the histories with policing, and like it's not really our fault that we feel anxious. I don't really know how to get around that, but I think like we both have to. This sounds so cheesy, but like you have to like police have to see like Black and brown people as like actual people, and we don't have, and like there is like this idea of like aggression like placed upon Black people and upon brown people, like it needs to be dissipated. Like this idea of like Black people are up to no good and brown people are no good is just like, it's built in like bias and like racial bias, like explicit bias and implicit bias that like needs to be addressed. And like when you go into the police academy, like you should like have to take like trainings to get rid of that bias. Like you can't go into these two situations with like strong bias against Black people. Like you shouldn't be an officer if you're gonna do that, because you're putting your own personal like differences, and you could put someone's life at risk just because like you don't like a certain group of people, just because that's how you were raised. Like that's not an excuse anymore. And I think we have to move forward as a society to really look about like the ways the labels and the stereotypes we place upon people, especially Black people and people of color.
Oh, you, as someone said in the comment, you hit the nail on the head. So they wanted to lift that up to you. Chief, I will get to you, but I want you to be thinking about, when I come to you for the question that I originally started with, I want you to be thinking about this training piece, because Meredith has lifted it up, and I want to give you a chance to adequately respond on some of those San Diego training policy pieces, if you can. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Life, and ask you the question. How do you ensure, how should the city commit to reinvesting in Black, brown, and other marginalized communities? And what do you think the priorities should be?
Yes, okay, I had trouble unmuting there for a second. So I think first I'd like to go into a little bit about what the chief had mentioned in terms of the last question around what we can do when people have bad experiences with the police. And I think it's really important there to recognize the thought and emphasis on the after before, and rather than the before, right? Someone in the chat mentioned how if they had a bad experience with the police, I don't think that their initial reaction would be to call the police to further solve that issue. And I think around the discussion of, you know, I was encouraged not to name any names or specific experiences or situations, but Margarita Servin, she was wrongfully arrested by San Diego Sheriff's Department after a peaceful protest in Imperial Beach. And she's a prime example of, we've been out in the streets making calls for her, and she still has charges against her, right? Like, she's still, this is going to affect her for the rest of her life. And we're here, you know, discussing this broader idea as if it's something that's, you know, not happening right now. So I think that it's important to know, you know, we talk about the questions of, like, as a law-abiding citizen, as someone who is a good person, you know, we have to have this moral value to be treated with respect and to be treated, to be granted life. I think that that needs to be checked right away, because, you know, what's my 4.3 GPA, what's my accolades, my scholarships, and my achievements to an officer with a gun and me with my tail light out, right? And then we've been shown before that people who are EMTs, people who are family members, people who are, you know, quote unquote good people who have done good, are still killed the same way that people who are who have done things perceived as bad, right? So I think that we hear this repetition of solutions in terms of you know, a lot of reform and a lot of what we can do after the fact and training. I do have a lot of opposition to that, just because of the fact that this is all increasing, right, the police's budget in many ways, and this is increasing power, because financial power is huge in this. And this goes with the conversation of, you know, increasing body cams and training, when it's like, there are still that those two things would have done nothing to save the hundreds and hundreds of Black lives that have been lost, you know, except for record them on camera. And I think that ultimately, going straight to the question as far as what we can do to reinvest in the community, my ultimate answer to that is abolition and police abolition. I think that when we look at history, if we look at why police were initially created as, you know, as a form of controlling, killing, capturing enslaved Black people, I think that we can implement, and we have implemented, all the different solutions that have come to mind, right? And all the different reforms that have come up, but there are still people dying. And we hear a lot of numbers and data, as I mentioned before, but I think one is too enough. We could see one Black person, one white person, one Asian, Mexican, Latinx person who died at the hands of another human being, and that should be enough to say we need to scrap all of this and completely redo it. I think that there's a lot of question in terms of replacing, right, the police or some kind of public safety entity. But I think that we need to remember that a system that incarcerates, that puts people in cages, that kills people, cannot be replaced with something similar, right? We need to completely, in my belief, we need to completely reimagine all of that. We need to completely go back to our roots of community, love, protection, and serving. And by our roots, I mean our ancestral roots. I mean what has worked with us before colonization and before the conquering of this land. And yeah, so, but I think that right now, a more immediate answer to getting to that point, as far as reinvestment, is getting involved with mutual aids for the people who are on here. It's not necessarily for the police, but for those youth watching, there are mutual aids like Breakfast Block that are out here, or we're out there every 2 Saturdays a month, giving resources to the houseless community in San Diego. And we do this as a form of mutual aid, because it's important that we recognize, like, that is a form of protection, that is a example of serving the people, right? And there are so many other opportunities to do something in relation to that. There's so much more I want to add, and I know I'm taking up quite a bit of time here, but one more quick thing I want to mention is we mentioned earlier, you know, things that are outside of police's responsibilities or job, or out of control, or out of their control specifically. And one of the things mentioned was, you know, poverty and crime. And I think that it's important to note that these outside entities actually have everything to do with policing. You know, when someone is in a house, when a human needs shelter and is in a house, and another person comes with a gun and tells them they need to go out in the street, and then they need food, so they steal you know, some kind of a loaf of bread from the local market, and then they get arrested and put in a cage. I think that crime that just was generated there, that poverty that was just generated there, has everything to do with policing. So I think that definitely needs to be included into this discussion. Thank you. That's all.
Well, you just took us through an entire history and cycle of wellness and health and history. So I thank you for that. And I thank you for being encouraged to speak your truth to power. So I do want to acknowledge that. What I do also want to lift up in this is also, we're here to talk about the report too. And like some of those findings, that the things that you are speaking about and you're lifting up in your lived experiences are being found within those numbers. And while people are you know, so it is the validation of the lived experience that this is what I am saying and what I'm feeling does show up in some of the numbers here. And so I do, Chief, I want to ask you, as you're thinking about the impetus for even commissioning a relationship with CPE and this report itself, can you talk a little bit about that? And then I want to go back to the original question, because I do think that hearing both Meredith and Life's perspectives and thinking about this, there had to be an impetus for you to step up and say, well, hey, I want to take a look at what I'm hearing and see how this fits into what we're working on when it comes to data and accountability and all of those things. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you. You know, obviously, I became the chief in March of 2018. I think shortly after that, I started hearing about the Center for Policing Equity, and obviously I was aware of our STFU study that showed disparities, and looking at different things like that. I really wanted an independent body, if you would, that could look at data and give us a report. And I really wanted it to be independent. I didn't want it to be a study that the San Diego Police Department or the city of San Diego paid for. And so in 2019, I forget exactly what city I was at. I met several of their staff from the Center for Policing Equity, really had a conversation with them about what it is that they provide. And it really met my needs. I really wanted to do a deep dive into data, a deep dive to really help us shape possible future policy and procedure in operational, if you would, operational decisions. And so we partnered with them in 2019. We were able to get a contract with them that obviously eventually led to this report. So it's really about transparency. It's really about having somebody that can help us improve upon our profession with data-driven things, with suggestions that was independent for us. And so this is where we're at with that. And you know, using this as a good roadmap, if you would. And again, part of that suggestion, recommendation from them was to really take a deep dive into that. And so, you know, for instance, I'll talk about use of force. Obviously, use of force is something that we also or always want to use as a last ditch effort to take somebody into custody. And so about 9-10 months ago, I started a unit called the Force Analysis Unit to really take a deeper look into our use of force. What is our use of force? Is it a show of force, what was mentioned earlier in the report? Is it pointing a firearm, pointing a taser, or is it physical force? And so really looking at that, and obviously we're still very much in the early stages of that, but we're looking at use of force on a weekly basis. We're looking at it to look at trend analysis, to look at it, are there certain types of calls that are generating more force? Is it based on addiction or mental health or violent crime or anything that we can learn from that? So that's really what I look at, again, trying to always look at how we can make improvement, how we can provide better service to the communities that we serve. And then also we look at that in training. And going back to your first question about training, right? Whether it be about implicit, explicit, non-biased policing, and the number of hours, I think is Dominique was the question that you asked, if I remember right.
I think my question is going to be, I want to talk to you about, so now you talked about the data piece of it, right? And being able to actively want to look at the disparities and how things have been shaping up in San Diego. So now what do you think the city should do to commit to reinvesting in Black, Brown, and other marginalized communities? Like, what do you think the priority should be? Because we've heard Life and Meredith talk about their lived experiences, the everyday San Diegan experience from Black and Brown folks. And we've seen the data from the report itself. So where are the priorities and where are you giving credence to investing in those Black and Brown communities, or how do you as a chief foresee that happening?
Well, a lot of it we've done. A lot of it has been this change in policies, whether it be our use of force, our de-escalation policies, our protest policies, our policies around the LGBT community, consent policy that's coming up. A lot of that is being driven by trying to provide better public service. So really my promise to everybody is to continue to look at how we can make improvements, how we, when it's our ability to change outside of our control, how we can change. So that's why I really look at, for instance, right now, our homeless population is driving about 30% of our contacts. How is it that we can look at that? Obviously, that's been an ask of our community. Obviously, there is a role for both the community in that, but also there is a role for law enforcement. And so how can we shape that to reduce the disparities, but also provide a better service to our community, to also obviously help those in need, to everybody's point. So that's our promise to that, is continue to look at improvement, whether it be through policy, whether it be through decision, with obviously community involvement.
Got it. And so one of the questions that came up, to get a little bit more specific, I feel like I'm drilling in on this, but it's not intentional, but these are coming up, is, so for example, the treatment of young people in La Jolla versus Southeast San Diego. And if I pronounced that wrong, I'm very sorry. But please don't get me. I'm an East Coaster. But how do you ensure that your officers respond to the same incidents in different neighborhoods in the same way? The conversation comes up even before you get to alternatives in policing or alternative service response, or even abolition, which many people are on that spectrum, like Life had lifted up. For today, how do you ensure that the system that's currently in place at this moment, if a call were to come in, that people are receiving the same treatment when they're calling for the same calls for service at this point, speaking today?
It goes back to consistent training across the board. And I'll start with our police academy. The Peace Officer Standard of Training, which is the accredited body for California, has training modules for our academy. We far exceed those training modules. And then we continue training. So it's consistent training, it's a constant look at training to where we can make improvements on our training based on real world examples. It's debriefing incidents after they happen to see if we can glean anything from it, much like our use of force analysis team that is really looking at all of our use of force to see if there is something that we can learn from it, something that we can make changes to reduce those different things. So again, it really comes down to training, and whether it comes into our non-biased policing. Right now, our officers are getting 136 hours of training, but that's continuous. It's through our AOT cycle, it's through our critical response team training. Even our dispatchers and our call takers even went through bias by proxy. That was just finished within the last couple of weeks, making certain that we don't necessarily respond to calls where someone calls in on either Hispanic or African American person just because they're walking down the street. Trying to get more, ask those tougher, deeper questions to make certain that we are not responding to those types of calls. So again, it goes back to consistent training, goes back to best practices, and I truly believe we have some of the best training in this nation, but always looking to make improvements in that arena.
Thank you for that. So I want to go into talking about neighborhoods, because we just lifted up different neighborhoods, and people like to point to neighborhood crime rates as causes for disparities in policing. But our report accounts for crime and poverty, et cetera. And when we speak about these disparities, we often get asked about analysis and how we do those analysis here at CPE when it pertains to the report. So Janie, if you don't mind coming back on for a second and sort of talking a little bit through that process.
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Hi again, everyone. I'm not your data scientist at CPE, but I certainly have an understanding of how we look at what we consider three major areas of possibilities that should be looked at that could cause or be a cause of some of the disparities that might be seen in a report. So we do a scientific method called regression analysis. And using regression analysis, we have chosen crime, poverty, and demographics. Our report is based on population benchmarking. Now, there's many other ways to do reports. CP has chosen population benchmarking using the most recent census from the American Census Survey. We use that as the basis to determine people in a demographic area. We know that people are mobile. We know could be issues with it, but we do this on a national level with all the agencies we work with in order, again, to bring sort of a sense of security in looking at different agencies and where the issues might lie. In order to look at as fair as we can, we've picked, again, those three areas, population, crime, and demographics, and we do what's called a regression analysis on that. And by looking at that, and right now we are only looking at what's called UCR, Uniform Crime Report, Part 1 crimes. If you can imagine, those are your major crimes that someone might be charged with. And I'll just give a couple: homicide, an assault, a rape, something like that. So we take those and we do a mathematical formula by looking at a number of those crimes reported. We look at the poverty level that is reported, and we put that all into this mathematical formula in this regression analysis. And it turns out at what portion might those three factors also play into disparities seen. And then we take that off of the police because they are not responsible for those. And what is left at that point has the potential of looking at what we would call disparities. And the one thing I put in the chat, and I want to encourage people to look at the companion website, because one of the most important statements that we make in the companion website is that situations predict strongly inequitable behavior more so than the attitudes and intentions. And we looked at 4 potential risks: organizational risk factors, strategic risk factors, external risk factors, and ultimately external risk factors. And they're all defined in there. And these are the opportunities that San Diego is looking at when they talk about doing that deeper dive into the numbers after we've done the regression analysis, and they're still showing disparities in numbers. And so we give them that opportunity. So I encourage you to look at the companion website and read about that. And then again, remember that we can't account for all the possibilities in a regression analysis. We chose the 3 that we have chosen using, again, population as our benchmark. If that is helpful, I hope so.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know that we are coming up on time, and I know people want to get food and they want to go with their loved ones and do all those things, and that's wonderful. So I do have one question though, that I would love all of you to answer. One of the things that was lifted up at the end of the presentation was around community voices and what now? What now? You know, Meredith and Life, you have the floor. You have the chief here, you have the ear of the chief right now. You know, I don't want you to go on a soapbox, you know, but I do want you to be able to have the floor to ask anything that you want to ask when it comes to data, when it comes to transparency, when it comes to accountability. I'll give you the floor to ask anything, or even to lift up, you know, what now? What do you hope will happen as this report has come out, as there have been several reports? What are you hoping, and what role can the chief play in what your hopes are in this process?
I think a big thing is for transparency with the police budget. I honestly didn't know the police budget was as large as it was until I think last summer. And I think like obviously there's certain things that like the city can't disclose. But I think a lot of people don't really know how much is going into the San Diego police and just police budgets as a whole. And I think creating type of transparency so people can kind of see like how big the budget is, and if they're in like that, I don't know if the police doesn't need all that. The police doesn't need all that money, so that should be implemented in other community aspects and resources. I think transparency between the San Diego Police Department and the city of San Diego is like absolutely crucial. That I feel like that's the only way. If we're going like the route of like reforming, transparency is one of like one of the key ways to build a relationship. Because if you're not being transparent, then how are people? If citizens aren't being if police aren't being transparent, then they can't really expect the citizens to be transparent too. I think that is like a big thing, and that's something I definitely think needs to be talked about more within the police department, is like the budget and like what goes to what, and like if there's any money to give outside to other communities, because people are struggling, and there's so many things that like people need, and like what Life was talking about, like mutual aid is like something that like really needs to be like kickstarted. And mutual aid doesn't mean like charity. It doesn't mean like who is able to get this, if you qualify, if you're not on drugs, if you're blah, 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 blah. Like mutual aid is just like everybody should get like the basic needs, like food, water, like shelter, like that kind of stuff. So I think that's something like transparency is a big thing that I definitely hope to see in the coming years with the police department. And that's where I think the city needs to go.
Thank you. So when you were talking, I had an immediate question then thinking about the chief. Where do people find information about the budget for police departments? And is there any way that you could give a little synopsis or primer on what the budget currently looks like, or where people can go to find information on that policing budget?
Yeah, it's a great question. I appreciate Meredith asking that question and allow me to have some clarification. It's posted online. If you go to San Diego, I think it's www.sandiego.gov.finance/finance. It really breaks down our budget down by line. And first of all, I want everybody to understand we have roughly about 2,600 staff that are part of the San Diego Police Department. That includes our sworn police officers and our professional civilian staff, everywhere from a criminalist to a dispatcher to a call taker. So when you look at that, yes, our budget is large. About 86% of that covers salary and benefits. So when you look at really what's discretionary, if you would define that, again, 86% of it is spoken for in officer salaries. Then you have a lot of that percentage left goes to buying equipment, whether it be vehicles, whether it be pens, paper for reports, ink for printers, all the different equipment to outfit a police officer, or make certain that we have everything we need in the lab to process evidence. And then it goes on to whether it be gas, electricity. But I do want everybody to understand one thing. Our budget is not enough to what we need. We rely on donations from the community. We rely on donations from the Police Foundation to purchase equipment for us, to provide training to the community. And so although a large budget, yes, but it's not nearly enough to cover everything that we do. And again, you can find every single line item breakdown on that website.
So fundraising, you're fundraising? What does fundraising cover? Or is it like a particular, when you say you have to fundraise, I just had a question. I was just thinking about that because I never knew that police departments had to fundraise. So that's interesting to me.
Yeah, we don't have enough money in our budget year in, year out to cover some of our expenses. Some of it is training. We do a youth training program for basically child stalking, for basically predators online for our youth in the sexual trafficking area. We don't have enough money to provide ballistic panels for officers when they go up against officers or against people that are firing rifles. Our body armor only stops pistol calibers, but a lot of times we're responding to calls where someone is armed with a rifle. So we have to rely on outside donations to cover the cost of our ballistic shields, both for the officers and our vehicles. So if we need to go up and do a rescue, of a victim down, that we have that extra protection to go up. And there's others. I think the last 100 police dogs were purchased through the Police Foundation because the city doesn't have that money. And so again, although our budget is very large, it does not cover the whole needs of the San Diego Police Department.
Okay, so question came in, Life, I know you have something empowering to say, so I'm gonna hold you for a second, because I know you got it. But Chief, I'm pushing because budget stuff is flowing in as you're talking about the budget. So a couple questions again coming to you. Someone in the chat talked about the budget item for school budgets for police. And the question is around, why do we need police on campus? During stay-at-home learning, much of that money could have been used to support emotional health and internet access for students. Another question came in around the budget and homelessness. So according to a 2020 report by the San Diego Regional Task Force on Homelessness, people between the ages of 18 and 24 who are experiencing homelessness or transitioning from state custody or foster care make up 10% of San Diego's unsheltered population. And it's also clear that being homeless tends to lead to more interactions with law enforcement. And so the question is around, what strategies is the department using to support and reduce harm to the unhoused population? I kept saying homeless and I apologize. And in the long run, what do you see as the department's role in addressing the instability of housing for young people in particular? And then the question also pushed further as to why is a lack of housing a policing issue and sort of not a civil issue. So for me, I want to fold that all into one question to ask you, so it's not coming at you left and right. The question I want to know is, it seems that you are mentioning the budget. I'm hearing fundraising, and I'm like, whoa, fundraising. That was a lot. I never knew that was possible, that you had to fundraise. And then folks are saying that some of these things that school budgets for police and budgets for the unhoused youth, why are these things, first of all, happening in schools and happening to young people as an enforcement mechanism? And then why is there budget allocations for that? And where can, I guess, people learn more about sort of the breakdown of that? Just talk us through that process, because you hear the conversations around removing the policing footprint from alternative models and moving issues of social welfare and justice out of the policing purview. And those are a lot of intersectional questions that I wanted to just jump in there as quickly as I could. So it's very jumbled.
Okay.
But talk to us.
Let me go back to the budget too, because the question is there money that the police department can share with the community? And the answer is yes, I'm already doing it. I gave $300,000 to, and I'm expecting it to get off the ground any moment now, for the No Shots Fired program, which is a partnership with the community to do violence reduction. And I don't know if anybody saw some of the news, but we're seeing a major increase in violence and homicides and shootings. And so we do that. And there's a lot of different programs that we are part of for diversion, whether they be PLEADS or the SMART program. So there are a lot of diversion programs that we are involved in. So as far as our budget, we do give back to the community. I'm sure the community wants more, but we do that. As far as the need for officers on school campus, that really falls under the Unified School District Police Department. I don't have officers per se that staff city schools, but let me say this, absent 2020, when we didn't obviously have kids in school, threats on the schools are a problem. We field calls every single day where there are threats to our schools. I think everybody sees across the nation all the school shootings that have happened, the number of young kids that bring firearms to the campus. So I do believe there is a need for law enforcement on campus, but I also think it's a great opportunity for our youth in law enforcement to interact in a positive matter on school campus. And so that to me is an important thing. But as far as the budget for school police, that's something I can't speak on. That is a different entity than the San Diego Police Department or the city of San Diego. Dominique, you're gonna have to ask that more question, because I think there was like 4 or 5, 6 parts of that question.
Yeah, they were like,
I don't want
they were coming in. No, they were coming in. It just was about sort of the overall conversation. People were really getting specific on where police presence is really deeply impacting young people and wondering if that is the right method or response mode to support young people in their development. Thinking
Yeah.
about school resource officers in schools, thinking about how unhoused youth are being enforced, and is that an actual issue that police should have a purview to? Those are sort of the questions. It's the general social welfare. Should police be in those social welfare spaces? And if how is San Diego's police department sort of thinking about those issues and that conversation?
Yeah, let me, as far as the youth and our citizens that are experiencing homelessness, and what is our role in there? For the last 20 plus years, we've had a homeless outreach team that unites not only law enforcement, but with social workers, with nurses, and with psychologists. And so a lot of times when our homeless outreach team is actually talking to those experiencing homelessness, it's not law enforcement that is that contact point. It is a social worker, it is a nurse. And I also want, is any time that a San Diego police officer contacts somebody experiencing homelessness, the very first question we have is, will you be willing to accept resources? We provide resources. Our homeless outreach team does outreach 7 days a week. We're the only provider in the city that does outreach on a 7-day-a-week basis. We partner with a lot of different community-based and faith-based groups on a weekly basis. Every single Thursday, we have a huge outreach. We move that throughout the city. So it's really about the San Diego Police Department providing a resource. And I want to talk about the recent move to having people sheltered at our convention center. The San Diego Police Department and the homeless outreach team put the equal amount that everybody else combined put in there. So our outreach does work. I'm very proud of our outreach. And it really speaks for itself. Now, does that mean that I don't welcome more outreach? Absolutely not. I welcome community outreach. In fact, they're doing a huge 30-day push right now using community-based and faith-based outreach workers to really try to reach our homeless, those experiencing homelessness, and trying to get them into shelter, trying to provide them resources, whatever it is that they might need. Because I think what everybody understands is when you talk to somebody who's experiencing homelessness, it's not a one-size-fits-all treatment. You really have to get to know the person. You have to understand what it is that they need, and then really center a program around that individual and their needs. And so that's something the homeless outreach team does together in partnerships with the community. And I'm looking forward to having more of our community members out there doing that work so we can reduce the amount of people that are experiencing homelessness in our city.
Got it. So now I got to give it to you, Life. I know we have 10 minutes. I know you've been listening. I know you have a lot to say about some of these things. And what I want to get from you is, you've heard the data points around sort of these intersecting issues as they impact young people. You've heard Chief Neslet talk about how those proactive responses have been happening within his department and how he's been showing up for those. The budget, it was a lot of things in the budget. Go on the website and look at the budget line by line and talk to your folks. So I just want to get a sense from you, after hearing all of these things, are there any things that you want to lift up in these last few minutes? Is there anything you want to directly say to the chief? And then once you're finished with that, I want to give everybody a chance to give their last closing statement or their last empowering word or thoughts, and then we can close out for the night. So I turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you. So there's a couple of things to touch on. I'm trying to go pretty quick here, but for one, we talk about the discussion of cops on campus and firearms on campus, and I think that is a huge discussion as far as the many, many reasons that have been displayed why we need them to be off of our campuses. Not even to mention the school to prison pipeline and the conditioning that this environment pushes on Black and brown students, where these schools are more heavily policed, where, we're being trained to be constantly around, or they are being trained to be constantly around police officers, and then in an environment where they have to go through metal detectors and essentially, training them for prison. And that we can get all into the school to prison pipeline another time, but The chief, you made an interesting comment as far as how there's students all across the nation who bring firearms to campus, right? And this is a huge issue that we can that we need to definitely work on and solve. But I think that you make a lot of points that I would make the same way, just kind of flipped around, because firearms are still being brought on campus just by another force that has killed a bunch of people. Okay, so from school shooters to police officers, when they have killed a certain amount of targeted individuals, and we're replacing one of them, or we're trying to combat one of them with another type of lethal force involved, that has proven to not be really good for a lot of students and a lot of people who have been disproportionately impacted by police on campus. And we also talked about, how positive interactions between police officers on campus and the students, when in fact there's been a lot of data to show that these interactions are not often positive, that there are plenty of Black and Brown students who are very negatively impacted by the appearance of police in schools. The budget is a big discussion as well. The $19 million increase in police budgets, yes, that is $19 million. You mentioned, salaries that this has to pay, and then the that's like about 80-something%, I believe, was the number I heard. And then the rest of it, you mentioned things like gas or electricity and pencils. But what we're not talking about here is the militarization aspect of this, right? Like there are immense amounts of funds that are going to militarize the police, that are going to riot task force, that are going to attacking our own human rights out on the streets to protest our own rights within our own house. And even if we're giving $300,000 out of this 19 million back into some kind of other community source, I feel like these little things that we're mentioning are clearly not enough if people are still dying and people are still being attacked. This houseless outreach can only do so much, but there was just recently a houseless man who was wrongfully arrested for being for appearing to be peeing on the side of the road, which he wasn't doing, and there was an entire altercation by the police department's fault involving that unhoused man. And so I think that goes a lot to say as far as these solutions we're coming up with, and how, as much as they can seem like good things, are really, adding more money and really adding more police into situations that they're clearly not being de-escalated. And this kind of goes into my next point as far as crime prevention. And one point that I really want to stick with is that we've seen the data that crime has been going up, right? From my parents to my grandparents to however far back you want to go, crime has continuously been going up. And a lot of it comes from a lot of different entities, but the largest one being the state, and how funds are allocated and the different ways of which we are engaged, or people are engaging in criminal activities because of a lack of different resources, funds, etc., and the police's role in enforcing that, the police's role in creating that as well. And so I think that we've been shown that police do not prevent crime because crime rates are still rising. If police were to really de-escalate and prevent crime in schools, then we wouldn't see these same schools that are filled with police have the most amount of students entering into prisons and entering into carceral systems. And I think that, once again, all of these points I'm making, there's a larger discussion to be had here, that for all the community members here, I'm really excited to reach out to you guys after this and get it, we can talk further as well. But the amount of sweeps that the police department does on houseless folks every single day, in the same breath, you're trying to find them shelters, but then on a couple miles away, you're kicking them off the only place that they can, stay and sleep, on the side of the road. So I think that there's a lot that needs to be recognized. That is all intertwined with one another, right? From poverty to crime to policing and all these different, to schools, to all these different entities, and how there's one kind of umbrella over that as far as control and policing, and how we can further dismantle that. There's literally so much that I want to continue to dive into and discuss, but I think that it is super important that we are all continuing to recognize the role that we are playing in furthering the progression of liberation for our people. And when I say our, I mean yours, right? Being any kind of marginalized identity. And I think that when we talk about liberation and when we talk about freedom that we have yet to achieve, I think that we must, put an emphasis on the systems, the institutions, and the practices, the social beliefs, all of that needs to be continuously dismantled, and how we can do that in our everyday lives. And I believe that you mentioned we're going to do some kind of closing bit, so I'll save one of my favorite quotes for that part, but that's all I have for now. Thank you.
That's all? That's all? It's like, no, I know you are so eloquent and really lifted up a lot of different things. So thank you so much for that. What I do want to say is I know we're almost at close, and I want to give everybody a chance to do that. So I want to thank everybody who took the time to stick with us this entire time to learn more about sort of the community aspect of the report and how we're thinking about this report as a living, breathing sort of moment in time. It captures an essence of what has been happening and what's to come in many, many ways with the CPE report, with the other reports that have also been done on San Diego, because again, the ecosystem is participatory when we're thinking about the health and wellness of our people. And that includes all actors, that includes the lived experiences, that includes the data points to lift up what we already know to be true or what we feel in our bones to be true every day. And so I want to thank all the people that have been involved in that process. I do want to thank you, Meredith, and you, Life, for coming and adding that perspective of being as members of San Diego's community who have been inundated with reports recently and have taken the time to come back to learn more and hear more about another report. And I want to just acknowledge that it takes everybody listening to everybody's experiences in this ecosystem to understand the viewpoints of where people are coming from. That shows the numbers that we see. We see those numbers and we know from different vantage points how we are directly impacting how we show up to validate those numbers or make them true or not. Chief Nislet, I want to thank you for taking the time to walk us through some of these policies, practices, and procedures and things of how the system currently functions. What I will say is that you're going to have a lot of people in your inbox looking for that budget and be contacting you. They're going to be wanting to know more and more about these training opportunities and things. So thank you so much for just being a resource to folks to understand this current policing system. With that, I do want to go ahead and give Meredith the chance to sort of close out, because I know we've been holding you in a quiet space. And then Chief, you can give us some words, and then Life, you can close us out for good. For everybody watching, thanks so much. Your time is valuable and your voices are valuable as well.
I just want to say thank you to Chief for taking the time. I know it's a struggle to talk about these issues, but I thank you for taking the time. I know you're very busy. And then I just want to say to everyone, if you think that this issue does not affect you, or you're like, I don't really care about this, like blah, blah, blah. One of my favorite quotes I've been really thinking about a lot lately is, the personal is political. So we're all affected by this in some way, shape, or form. So just be aware, do research, educate yourself, empower each other, empower young people to get involved, whether it's your kids or your nieces, your nephews, anyone. I definitely want to see more youth getting involved in San Diego, and Life is only one person. She cannot do it all by herself. So that's something I definitely want to emphasize, is just organizing, community awareness, community activism, mutual aid. There are huge strength in numbers, but it can't fall exactly on one person. It can't fall all on CPE to make changes. It has to be everywhere in little pockets. So that's what I want to say.
Thank you. Also lifting up, you did mention, but you didn't mention her by name. Francine kept mentioning, where are the young Black men? Where are the young Black men? Where are they? Find us. You're a part of this ecosystem and we want you to be a part of this work. So Chief, do you want to give us some closing words?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for being a part of the panel. I appreciate the time, and so I just, again, want to thank CPE, want to thank Live, want to thank Meredith for having this discussion. I appreciate it. I hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
All right, Life, close us out. You're the future. Doesn't that sound very daunting to say?
Oh gosh. I want to appreciate any community members that came out here today. I want to recognize the comments and how people brought up some amazing things. And talking about how tanks were brought to different vigils and how reimagining policing needs to be done because of different situations like that. Thinking about, we had great discussions as far as how police officers need to gain more money to continue to put some more gear on, while my teachers have to get some more money to buy some expo markers. And I think that these are all very interesting intersectional discussions. And I'm so glad that Meredith, you as an amazing person, from what I can already tell, had used your emotional labor and to come today and speak. You're amazing. Okay, favorite quote that I've mentioned before I wanted to share by Angela Davis is that we must act as if we can radically change the world, and we must do so all of the time. With that, Asada Shakur, it is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. Thank you guys, that is it.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you all for participating and have a wonderful evening.